In February 1985, an 18-year-old Kirkland, Washington man pled guilty to 4 counts of computer trespass. The defendant was accused of gaining illegal access to 4 large Seattle area firms. Would you state your name, please?
My name is Mike Wilkerson. Usually they have, the way it's set up is you dial in on one line and it calls you back on another so that you can't, it's supposed to be the ultimate security. But what you do is you break into Cosmos and you find out all of the phone numbers that that company owns, and you call it until you find the 2 that are hooked up to data. And then you get the callback modem and you set up call forwarding on that line so it call forwards to your home number. That takes a lot of work, but you have this invulnerable feeling. You just don't think you're gonna get caught. You ask any hacker out there that hasn't been caught yet if he thinks he's gonna get caught, and he'll tell you no. And if they tell you yes, it's because somebody close to them just recently got busted, and they have a feeling of being watched.
Whether you're curious about the 80s hacking scene and some of its most infamous characters, or if you care to indulge in a bit of nostalgia for the early days of computing, or if you just simply like to kick back with a light-hearted coming-of-age tale, then this book is for you.
Hello and welcome to the show. This is the Cult of Conspiracy, and my name's Jonathan.
I'm Jacob.
And today we have an awesome guest, Mike Wilkerson. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely, man. So, by the way, anybody wants to be able to see any of the pre-show, anything like that, it's on patreon.com/Cult of Conspiracy podcast or rockfin.com/Cult of Conspiracy. We just had an awesome pre-show with this guy.
We literally had to stop ourselves because we realized like this needed to be on the main episode. We had to stop because just bullshitting with this gentleman, just as we do, just getting to know each other, we in turn got into the deep. We were already starting to touch on some things that were going to start opening up questions that were going to go deep, and we're like, wait. We got to start this thing.
Right. And also, whenever you sign up for Patreon or Rockfin, you also get access to the live once a month show that is happening Sunday, January 28th at 9 p.m. Central. We're going to be going for at least 3 hours, I would imagine. And it's always a great time. You can always, jump in on the Zoom call with us, ask us anything. You're face to face with us. It's a great time. You can ask Jacob literally anything, anything. He doesn't hold anything back. It actually gets a bit scary.
Sometimes we do have to edit certain things from the live show. Sometimes things do get a little too spicy. It'd be like that.
I mean, specific things like, whenever Jacob goes shirtless and it still looks like he's wearing a sweater, that kind of stuff.
You ain't got to get ready if you stay ready. God wanted me to be hairless or hairy. He did not want me to be a hairless perpetual Peter Pan type.
Hairy like animal.
And you know what I'm saying? I'm never worried about being cold. Even shirtless, I got my sweater on at all times. Say what you want. I call that correct genetics.
Anyway, you want to be a part of that, then come on over to Patreon or Rockfin, and it's always a great time. But anyway, Mike, you're somebody that I've
taken my shirt off on camera. That's fucking hilarious.
It might have to be time. But,
it may happen. I mean, shit.
So, Mike, I've definitely heard you on other podcasts or seen you across other YouTube channels and stuff before, and I've always loved everything that you always lay down. It's been a while, so I'm actually kind of surprised that I remember that. But as far as that goes, would you mind telling our fine cult members just everything that you really get into?
Oh, wow. Well, I'd say the thrust of my channel has been on the subject of, what we were talking about before in the pre-show, biogeology, which is a term that I confiscated or appropriated, that's actually used to describe the relationship between the lithosphere and the biosphere, and how plant life affects the upper atmosphere and that sort of thing. It's a very little used term. It's not a big aspect of geology, or I don't even know what branch of science that really is a part of. But I appropriated the term because I wanted a term that was broad enough that it could express the idea that maybe not everything that we were taught about the stones and how mountains form and all of that was necessarily accurate. And so for me, a big step along the way was learning that petrification could happen quickly. And when I was going through high school and through college, you get these time frames that are hundreds of millions of years long, and we learn about petrified trees, for example, and that they take these incredibly long periods of time in order to form. And yet there's lots of examples in the fossil record of all kinds of things that shouldn't be possible that they exist because they're soft tissue. Things like jellyfish that are perfectly petrified in all of their detail, that we're told it's not possible that soft tissue can petrify because the worms, the larvae, the bacteria, the microbes, they're all eating away at this flesh as it's decomposing. And so that's why all we're left with typically are bones, and that's what they're usually looking for on their digs and trying to find, and fossils of different types that are embedded in different layers of sediment.
Yeah. Now, you said petrification can happen a lot quicker than what we previously assumed. Based off of your research, how quick are we talking? Because like you said, if a jellyfish was to die and go through any type of process for fossilization, that sample, the animal proteins themselves, I personally have a very hard time imagining a scenario in which those get preserved and not eaten away by all the other plant and algae and bacterial life that typically go into the life cycle. There's examples, yes, of like crustaceous creatures that were able, their shell was fossilized, and at least that makes sense to me. But for a jellyfish to petrify, how fast are we talking here?
Well, that's a good question. I can't really answer that, but what I can say is I think it goes everywhere from instantaneous to something that can happen in a short amount of time, maybe hours, maybe days. Maybe the process has begun and then it's finished off in other ways.
Okay.
Like one of the ways that if you think of a tree is soft tissue, right? It's not bone, and yet trees can petrify.
We think of trees as hard, but in reality, it's just really dense fibers. It's just fibrous membrane.
Yeah, and
material.
there's a circulatory system, and there's a flow of different fluids going through it and everything. So, we know that soft tissue can petrify. It's just said to be very rare that something like an organ would petrify. You can find bones all over the place, but you're not going to find petrified hearts lying around, or at least not in the mainstream model.
Right.
And so because of the larvae situation, that's one of the reasons they say that doesn't happen. Well, I think I coined the term paradigm blindness because I think we're all suffering from it in different degrees when it comes to all sorts of different subjects, where we're taught a set of beliefs as we're growing up, and then everything that we try to understand about our world and the nature fits into that belief structure. And there's an old line that if they can get you asking the wrong questions, it doesn't matter what your answers are, because you're constantly going to be trying to fit what you're discovering and you're observing into a faulty paradigm. So I think that's what everyone is suffering from to one degree or another, especially experts, especially people with PhDs in different subjects. I call it expertitis. Because it's like inflammation of the expert, where they know a lot about a particular thing, but the more they learn about, it's like it's getting finer and finer and finer, their specificity, but they don't necessarily have the big picture. And there's not a lot of cross-disciplinary pollinization, where people are interacting and sharing information.
You see that really all over the place. It's always like, if that, then this, if that, then this, if that, then this. But if your first if that, then this is completely guided in the wrong direction, then all the following if that's, then thises will be completely down the wrong rabbit hole of what you're supposed to be looking at in the first place.
There's tons of examples of this. Scientific labs that were like on some exploratory thing, only to find that it was a dead end because they were going off of something that was found 20 years ago. So years and years of their research and development and money and time and effort and theses and fucking all the shit all just literally amount to bupkis. That happens all over. You look at theoretical physics in and of itself, that whole speciality is littered with failures. I mean, as is most professional work, I would argue. I mean, you look at the medical science. Tell me how many times they got shit wrong before they found a method that worked throughout the course of human history. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, most things, they're funded to be to find a specific thing. And that's going about it the wrong way.
Right. If you're funding it looking for a certain... what's the old adage? If you're a hammer, then every problem tends to start to look like a nail.
Be a nail.
Yeah. Right. I mean, all the big tobacco companies, they were finding ways that it would be okay for pregnant women to smoke, right? Yeah. And that's where all the ads and all that stuff were coming. And it's like, I'm sure you can always find some harebrained benefit, that would benefit whatever your cause is, that would make you more money. There always will be some angle that you can take.
Or you just flat out lie.
There's that too.
There is always that, especially if you have
how many people are willing to lie for, to serve their own...
Oh, well, yeah. Especially if you don't get more funding unless you show something that may or may not be true. So you absolutely fudge some of your research findings, and that's why we always got to test the source. Just because an official research document doesn't mean that it means shit. Bill Gates has research documents showing that if he buries trees, that will somehow help global warming. That doesn't mean that it's real, y'all. Test the source, as I always say. Anyway.
I think you should start by burying himself, and then we might solve all kinds of climate issues.
We agree. Oh my God. Shut down all the sweatshops that he funds. Man, I bet you it would actually help the carbon footprint of China, but whatever. Anyway, actually, that's about to get helped anyway. Old boy is still running for president of Taiwan. The dude who owns like half the sweatshops that makes any Apple products. Shit's getting real, dude.
I mean, Apple's so big that I think that they're bigger than any one, chink in the armor, bro.
Oh, no. But it's just
Damn, I did not mean for that to come across that way.
Woo, that was not a slur.
No.
That was a chink in the armor. We're talking, that was a European slur.
Sorry about that.
To Europe.
Yeah.
Because I fight in armor. That was an inside joke. That was a little behind the baseball, y'all. Y'all know I fight in boo hurt. Anyway, so
I mean, basically what I'm saying is that, yeah, like the whole structure is too big.
I didn't even think of it. That was fucking great.
I know. I caught myself on that one.
But no, just all the shit for these sweatshops are now just going to be owned by the Chinese state. The iPhone's still going to come out. It's just going to be half owned by China. So let's talk about the malware you don't even know about that's going to be in the new iPhone 16 when that bitch drops. Whatever.
Right. But anyway, look, Mike, not to go too far off in the weeds.
Sorry.
As far as all this petrification, all the, whether, the bones are millions of years old or the organs that they're possibly finding imprinted on stones or wherever they may be, this would seem to throw a wrench in the gears, I guess, would be the non-racist term, as far as all of, the findings of dinosaur bones even.
Yeah, well, dinosaurs, that's a whole rabbit hole unto itself. There's a lot of people that have dug into that, and there seems to be a lot of falsification of research, and they're piecing bones together and creating whatever creature they want so that they can be the discoverer of that creature. And then, or they'll find a couple of bones and then they extrapolate from two bones like what the rest of the skeleton looked like. And they're making claims all the time that are not necessarily substantiated. But I'm not going to go into that. That's not what I'm interested. I'm of the mind in general when it comes to things like dinosaurs that gigantism was definitely a thing. For sure. Whether you're looking at the mainstream model or alternative takes on cosmology, you've got all kinds of examples of these gigantic creatures that existed before. And then they talk about the dinosaurs, which were then wiped out. And, but I mean, to me, large serpents, dragons, like all of the different cultures have these myths in the historical record of these different great creatures. So I think dinosaurs is one thing, but when it comes to like how fast do things petrify, we were on that a little bit before. I was going to mention something called an anaerobic environment, which would be where there's no air, so the bacteria, the larvae, they can't thrive in that kind of an environment. So then what you have, and what would that be? Well, for example, mud. There's a lot of talk about mud floods and all of these different cataclysms that just buried everything. Well, mud that's an anaerobic environment. So
or how
all of a
about
sudden,
amber?
These creatures.
You have the mosquito that was encapsulated in amber.
Yeah. So they, and that's one of their narratives when it comes to dinosaurs. The whole Jurassic Park thing was based on them extracting some DNA from a mosquito that had bit a dinosaur, and then they were able to clone these creatures. But the amber that's a different one. We can get into that later. But I mean, basically, they say amber is petrified sap, and I question whether it's petrified at all, because if you're looking at a hardness scale, like diamond is a 10 on the hardness scale. Sapphire, ruby, emerald, those are 9s. And then all the way down at like 2.5 is amber. So to me, you can look at a tree that's been cut and is seeping sap, and that sap starts to oxidize and harden. And essentially you've got amber already at that point. So I question whether amber is really petrified or if it's just a hardened version of the normal tree sap. And in my world now, where I've been looking a lot into the giant trees and the evidence that exists for those around the realm, as I've come to understand, sap, when it petrifies, becomes varying types of quartz, and quartz is the most prolific of the minerals in the world. So I think that's one thing. Looking at the sap, you can see that things are maybe not what we were told. When it comes to the sedimentary layering, if you look at Mount St. Helens, for example, when that blew, they had geologists on site shortly after, as soon as it was safe to go back into the zone, and they started looking at all these different slurry flows. And there are sections there where, a PhD geologist has gone through and he's filming and he's showing that these layers that we see here with all of their micro layering all formed in the space of like 6 hours. So what you're looking at is this large, wall of slurry flow that has all of this detail that we would call sedimentary layering. And this was laid down in a matter of hours. So that in and of itself just totally kind of debunks the looking at different layers and determining the age of things. Because they tell us, how old the layer is because of how old the fossils are, which they supposedly dated in different ways. But when you go into the fossils themselves, a lot of times you get circular reasoning where they're saying that they know how old the fossils are because of the layer they were found in. So all of this stuff is really justifying these really, really long timelines, hundreds of millions of years. Well, there's a guy named Roger Spur with the channel Mud Fossil University. He came up with this whole idea of mud fossils, which is basically that things get buried in mud and then they can petrify in a much shorter period of time than we were taught, right?
Okay.
And
Wow.
he claims to have petrified a chicken breast in about 6 months, and the solution for that is mud with a bit of salt water. So you've got the salt there, and a slight electrical current. Well, our Earth has a slight electrical current. So if there's a major mud flood that buries, countless beings, then that would potentially harden them into a mud fossil. And according to him, those can be anything from small creatures all the way up to titanic size. And he was talking about things like dragons in the Sahara Desert that are 1,000 miles long.
I would be very
shit.
curious how much of an electrical current was needed. You know what I mean? Is it like you actually had to have this thing hooked up to like 110 power, or are we talking like a slight like 3 volts? I mean, I don't know. I would love to look into that experiment more, to be honest with you. That's fascinating.
The Earth's electrical current. That's what is it? The Schumann resonance, or is that something different?
That's the Earth's frequency.
That's the base current, yeah, the Schumann resonance.
Okay.
And
So
I'm not-
you would have to just try and match that to try and emulate it.
Well, I mean, look, we know that big cataclysmic events let off charges, right? A volcanic eruption would, in fact, let off an EMP in and of itself, okay, if it was a hard enough one. Earthquakes can cause certain things electrically to happen. So I'm not, like, debunking this by any means. I'm just saying I would love to look more into the experiment itself, because that is fascinating. I'm not trying to be the stick in the mud here. Or the petrified stick in the mud.
These are very interesting subjects. What I wasn't aware of when I first started looking at all this is that there's actually a wide variety of different ways that petrification can come about. So you've got the mainstream model is what they call mineralization, which is basically it's an infiltration of the minerals that, say, in a mud flood, the minerals that are in the mud and are going to work their way into the fleshy tissue, whatever it is, while the gas and the liquid, the water, works its way out. Okay. And that slow replacement over time is what they say causes petrified trees. But that's happening over hundreds of millions of years in their model. You've got different examples of pine cones that are like this big in Argentina, and they slice them in half, and they've got preserved all of the incredible internal detail of the pine cone, but it's solid stone. And then what that stone is determined by what the original material was, what it was surrounded by. So it can be surrounded by mud, it can be surrounded by ash, it can be surrounded by high mineral content waters. All of these things petrify. There's a lake, I can't remember where it is. I think it's not far from the Black Sea that's called Lake Natron, that's got these incredibly high mineral content waters. And when creatures fall in, they don't get out. The only thing that can survive in the lake are flamingos, because they've got those long, narrow legs, and they're not being burned by the caustic waters of the lake.
Oh, wow. That sounds kind of like the Dead Sea.
Yeah.
But even worse.
If you search for Lake Natron and you do an image search, or Lake Natron animals, you find that there's a photographer that's gone around collecting these dead creatures while they're still relatively soft, and he positions them in different ways. And then he takes these incredible ghostly looking photographs of them. But that's just one example. There's another Mother Shipton's cave in Lake Natron animals, or the flamingos. Yeah, they live there.
So it's like a hotspot for flamingos, because they're the
things,
only things that can live there. Wow.
Yeah, there's I think there's some other animals that can handle it, but most will die if they fall in, and then they'll slowly petrify. there's a cave called Mother Shipton's Cave in England that's got high mineral content waters that are pouring down through the cave, and people go there and they hang up different possessions that are dear to them, and they leave them for a few months, and then they come back, and about 6 months later, I don't know how long it takes exactly, those things are completely encased in mineral and eventually will harden. But you were talking about electricity, because that's another one as well. You've got electricity and you've got plasma. Both can petrify.
Sure.
So there's a channel called the Thunderbolts Project, and it's the whole. They're presenting their theories on the electric universe rather than the NASA space heliocentric model that we get. They see a lot of the phenomena that NASA are sharing as really being electrical phenomenon of different types. And so they see the mainstream as having the wrong paradigm. And so they're seeing all these phenomena and trying to fit it into their paradigm. And it may be electrical in nature. I think that makes sense. But Montgo Jupp is one of the Thunderbolts guys. He did a video called, I think it was called Instant Petrification or Instant Fossilization. And one of the things he talks about in that are that there are all these examples of these creatures that are fully petrified in their death throes. Like they're like gasping for air, or they're, kind of like you see these at Pompeii, these bodies that are, in a particular position, even though a lot of people say that was faked with plaster and different things. But these creatures, you can find fossilized fish in the process of giving birth, or one fish in the process of eating another fish, or a fish still inside of its intestinal tract, and they're petrified. So that doesn't really make sense in the mainstream model. Like, how would that happen? Well, with in this video by Montgo Jupp, he's showing that there was this place where a high tension power line went down, and there was a row of trees that had been cut down. So all you had were stumps in the ground. And when the wires came down, they laid across these stumps without shorting out. So the current was flowing for several hours through these tree stumps. Okay. And apparently after that happened, the tree stumps were fully petrified, and then they dug them up and they found that even the root structures had petrified. So that's just a high tension wire that would be supplying a neighborhood. Imagine, like you said, with volcanic activity, if visually, if you look for volcanic thunderstorms, they're the most amazing lightning storms you can possibly imagine. So what if that kind of intensity was directed at different different substances? It would petrify very quickly.
And also, to bring up another thing, you said the amber is essentially, we are led to believe, petrified sap. Now, and I don't know how this lines up per the written narrative of time spans and years and gaps and ice ages and things, but hypothetically, if there was a giant tree that was oozing some sort of sap and a bug was to get caught in it at the moment of one of the ice ages that hit, because we've heard reports to say that happened so quickly. We had a mammoth that was frozen solid still eating grass, right? Like in mid-chew, this happened. In
the mouth, yeah.
So to say that there was possibly some sort of specific sap to a tree that was native to the earth at that time, that at that moment got flash frozen, so to speak, and that's what we call amber these days. I could see that being a way of quote unquote petrification in and of itself.
Yeah. Well, we know, like in the mainstream fossil record, they talk about gigantism. They'll talk about dragonflies that could be almost a meter large.
Right.
Well, if you have a tree that's a foot in diameter and you have a dragonfly that's this big, and we make that dragonfly a meter, how big is the tree going to be in relationship? It's going to be a huge jump in size. And they give us the dinosaur narrative, and they talk about all these megalodon and all these different creatures that supposedly existed that were gigantic. So it makes sense to me that if you're going to have gigantic fauna, you're going to have gigantic flora.
Absolutely.
Also, I don't see that as a reach. And I think that ultimately Hollywood and, the number one movie for many years in grossing movie was Avatar.
Yeah.
It clearly touches people in a way that
that means something. And a lot of people, cried real tears when the mother tree was taken down. I think these may not be, historically accurate as far as every event, but I think these kinds of things once happened. I'm of the mind, much more so now, that our mythology is closer to our real history than the history we've been given.
I'm from the frame of mind that mythology and song has preserved history much better than any history book ever created. Because you got to think about it. Most of those people, you would sit out by the fire and you would tell stories to your kids or to your family members or whoever was in your clan or whatever.
Sure.
And those stories are told over and over and over, and they're ingrained in people's heads. And think about even some of what's the famous, the poems from the Vikings. What's that called?
The sagas?
The sagas and stuff like that. That shit is so old. Yet, it's still very well documented.
Well, it was only documented because Catholic priests wrote it down. It was passed down orally from generation to generation, and then it got lost because of
But
the
it
mass.
eventually had to get there.
But I see that there's got to be room for both, right? And hear me out on this. I am not saying that we take the old campfire stories to be truth, because there's a lot of room for personal embellishment, generation to generation to generation to generation.
Is there not equally so with history books?
There equally is. Like I said, I believe that there has to be room for both. We have to look at all accounts and test sources from top to bottom. That's where the frame of mind I come from.
So, but yeah, as far as getting into the petrification and the fossilization and stuff like that, is it safe to say that, by questioning the narrative on how many years things take to get fossilized or petrified, that it's a cool way to look at things as a preservation technique from nature, but you're kind of saying that we shouldn't be assigning a specific duration associated with said fossilization.
I don't really make any assertions about how old stuff is. I don't know. When were these cataclysms? If the great trees really did exist, how long ago are we talking about? Clearly, it's antediluvian, before the great floods. The Bible and the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch specifically talks about the fallen angels and God basically sending angels to work at the trees and to bring them down, so that when God sent the flood, the Titans couldn't climb the trees to escape the flood. So,
while we're bringing up religious texts, what would you classify yourself as if you had to put yourself in a box, sir?
I'm definitely a creationist. I believe we live in a created realm.
Okay.
I believe there's a conscious creator. I don't adhere to any specific faith or religion.
Okay.
What
is your take on the Prophet Muhammad?
I don't really have one. I've never read the Quran, and
Okay.
I don't know enough about, when I was in my teens, I kind of saw enough of human history to realize that a lot of the greatest atrocities were being done in the name of religion, and from all sides, whether it was Christian or Muslim or Catholic, and so I was turned off by organized religion, and I noticed when I went as a young boy to church, just out of my own interest, that a lot of the people there didn't seem to be living in accordance with the principles that they were espousing, so I recognized that there was a lot of hypocrisy, and that people would go to church once a week and absolve their sins and think that they could sin the rest of the time, and that was okay. It was so I was turned off by organized religion, and I was raised by very alternative parents that were into astrology and tarot, and were both my mom and dad were followers of different Indian gurus at different points in their lives. So I had a very, very alternative upbringing when it came to religion, and I always identified a lot more with the East and their the ideas of reincarnation and karma and different dimensions and layers of experience and existence. And so I always felt like Christianity, the Bible, that these were kind of It was like spirituality light, and it was for people that needed a big sky daddy that they could have faith in. And the book gave them all the answers about how they were supposed to live their life. And yet that book, we know from the Council of Nicaea, and we know from all the different translations and all the different versions that exist and all the different languages written, that it's not consistent across the board, and that they threw books out and they added other things and they voted on stuff, and so
the reason why I ask is because you bring up the Book of Enoch.
I just wanted to say before you even get into that, did we just become best friends?
I think you may have found a new bestie.
That is entirely me. Like, I thought, like, I'm looking at you and I'm like, is this guy, like, is this some kind of paradox? Are you just like an older version of me? Because everything you just explained is exactly me.
Do you want to do karate
crazy.
in the garage? Yup. That's literally what just happened, ladies and
Crazy.
gentlemen.
Just don't put your nuts on my drum set and we'll be all right.
New bromance.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah. So,
international bromance, dude. This is intercontinental.
I love it.
Fuck
That's
yeah.
the same way I was growing up, and I went to church out of my own, curiosity. I saw the same thing. I've always kind of been, gravitationally pulled into the East and tarot and mysticism and astrology and stuff like that. So I'm right there with you, bro. I love it.
So why bring up the Book of Enoch? And I'm not asking this.
Let me just finish, because I may answer your question. So it's not just Enoch; it's the Book of Jasher. It's the Norse mythologies. It's all of these different examples of different cosmologies where they talk about a world tree at the center of the earth and the cosmic orb and all this stuff. It basically, what happened is, I got flat smacked, so to speak, by a good friend of mine, Alex Michael, who's also known as the conspiracy music guru. And the guy is a hoot, and he's an amazing musician. And he started introducing me to ideas that I just flat out rejected. And I thought he was a crackpot for even suggesting that some of the things he was suggesting might be true. But as I started to look into stuff, and I realized already that things like the moon landings were sketchy and probably all faked, and I had kind of gone down different rabbit holes, but I hadn't really ever considered the possibility that even the heliocentric model as a whole might be inaccurate. And when I started to look into what is the actual empirical evidence in support of the ball, I found it wanting, and a lot of the empirical studies, whether it's long distance photography or laser tests or mirror flashes or supposed boats going over the horizon that are being pulled back with high power lenses and all these things, I found that, one by one, all the things that I had been told were proofs that we were on a spinning ball were not accurate. And then when I found out that, basically page 1 of the Bible, Genesis 1, is talking about the firmament, separating the waters from the waters, and
it also talks about God
stuff.
being a baseball fan. Also confirms Genesis 1:1 that God is in fact a baseball fan in the big inning.
It's an outdated sport, but go ahead.
Whatever.
I listened to part of your Masonic baseball.
Oh, did you?
That was fun.
That was a fun one. I honestly did not know the connections. I thought that was like kind of a ha-ha joke until I really started digging. That was fun.
Pretty wild.
Dude, not in the mic. Are you serious right now?
Holy shit, dude. Did you already hit record?
Hit record? Bro, we are in the middle of an episode. What are you even talking about right now?
My bad, man. This new THCA bud we got from the Blom shop has been kicking my ass.
Oh, dude, you must be taking advantage of their new deals they got going on at theblomshop.com and using the promo code CULT for that massive 20% discount. Let me tell you, man, I went and checked out that website, and I can't partake of all of the substances they offer because, of my job. However, they do, in fact, carry all of the CBD products that anybody could ever ask for. I'm telling you, they really do have something for everybody.
You know it, my dude. They have such a great selection of THCA products, and with that promo code CULT giving everybody 20% off, they're the cheapest on the block. And you can get it delivered right to your door.
You heard them, Cult members. The Blom Shop's products have been cult tested and approved. So do yourselves a favor. Go check out our good friends at theblomshop.com. That's the Blom, BLOM shop.com, and get that 20% discount using the promo code CULT. That's CULT at theblomshop.com.
Have you guys, you've heard of Marty Leeds? Have you ever
Yes.
interviewed him?
Yes.
Yeah, because he did some years back. He did a couple of episodes on basically the esoteric and occult meaning of not just sports but also board games, and looking at the numerology and looking at the gematria, and it's pretty far out. A lot of our games are coming from very esoteric sources, and they're not just like something that somebody threw together. They're ways of teaching us different principles.
This actually makes sense.
Yeah, I think
aside from like chess or checkers or like a strategy style game, a board game made for children and families and
like
stuff,
the game of life is for sure on that list.
like, and I've never really thought about that to mean some sort of an occult thing. Not gonna lie, this is a new one for me to think about. But think about what other types of board games people gather around in a circle with their hands and they play with, type of thing that's gonna
Ouija board.
entrance you for hours and hours of fun and excitement over a board with some dice or a game of chance. The Bible mentions playing with games of lot, if you will. Same thing. I don't know. I've never actually thought about this one. Oh shit! Yeah, we gotta get this guy on. Oh,
You were
my
talking
God.
about oral. You were talking about oral traditions before. You know that's one of the ways they preserved everything is they're all memorizing these different songs, these different long epic poems that are telling not just stories that entertain the children, but they're layered with all of these different meanings that they absorb unconsciously, and then as they're older and older, it starts to unlock in different ways. And I think the games probably do similar things, and there were probably games before there was any written anything.
Isn't it Shoots and Ladders is based off the Battle of Waterloo, if I'm not mistaken?
You're asking a wrong guy.
I think I read about that somewhere. It was Napoleon's Battle of Waterloo, how his troops went in and around and had to come back, and that was a whole thing that Shoots and Ladders was actually based upon. I could be wrong, but yeah, no. You're on some shit here, my man. I've never thought about it from this perspective. Oh my God.
It's wild, dude.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, the point I was going to make about the Bible and these other texts is that when I started to approach Earthshape with real intellectual honesty and looking at it with a skeptic's eye, to see like what is the evidence for, what is the evidence against, what is the evidence in favor of a flat Earth or of a toroid or whatever, I had to take a step back and realize that I had cast out the Bible and I had cast out these other texts as superstitious, as not having any real basis in historical fact, as being tools of tyrants for the purpose of manipulating the masses and brainwashing them and getting them to just like lay down and wait for the savior to come and fix everything, while meanwhile they steamroll over us.
For sure.
So I was really stunned when it started coming out that there were all these passages, and I didn't even know about the apocryphal texts, the book of Enoch and Jasher and these others, and the Gnostic Gospels and all that. I read books on that years ago, but not in that context. And so I had to kind of swallow my pride on that one and realize, wow, there may be an actual creator, and maybe there's some a lot of truth to the Bible. There seems to be a lot of things that can be verified of different events and different places on the earth where things were said to have happened that you can see the traces of. So,
but none of that detracts from the wisdom found in the East and the reverence of trying to achieve enlightenment and all of these things. Like none of that detracts from that one iota. No.
Yeah, and in fact, you've got all these people talking about all these other mythical characters that were like died and were brought back, and that have these parallels to Christ's life. I think that's interesting. There's a guy named Jan Irvin. He had Logos Media, and he's done a lot of great stuff in collaboration with other people. And one of the things that he was discussing at one point that resonated with me is the idea that a lot of these different main religious texts that we find around the world were actually part of a larger canon of spiritual works that was then broken up, rewritten, switched around, and changed to match whatever historical narratives the narrative writers wanted people to believe. And so there's a thread of truth in all of them. But ultimately they went together in probably a more cohesive manner. I think it's an interesting idea. I don't know, when it comes to these texts, like you could spend a lifetime and still not really know.
Right.
It kind of, a lot of it comes down to belief. I watched Rob Skiba debate Sungenis, Sungenis, I think is his name. Can't remember his first name. But they were debating geocentrism, the Earth at the center of the universe. So it was geocentrism versus flat Earth. Because, I mean, obviously the flat earthers think that the Earth is centric also. But the science out there, when it comes to what the mainstream is giving us, says that they can't detect motion, and everything's moving away from us, so magically we appear to be at the center of it all. Right. So it was an interesting debate, because they weren't debating pro or against flat Earth. It was a very specific thing.
Yeah.
These guys grew up with the Bible. Who knows? Maybe their dads were preachers. They knew it inside and out. They could recall from memory all of these different passages and talk about Strong's Concordance and the translation and this and that. And I was like, I sat there watching it. I felt like I was watching Jedi masters duking it out with words, on the topic of the Bible or something.
Yeah.
And I realized in that moment, it's like, I'm in my 50s now. If I were to now that I've accepted that, oh wow, maybe there's some truth to these different things. Well, which one? Is it the Quran, the Bible, definitely not the Talmud, but it's all these different texts that ultimately I think you could study your brains out for a lifetime and still come across somebody who knows more and proves you wrong about stuff that you were certain about. So
I love this.
I've tried to focus more on stuff that I can see, that I can hold in my hand, that I can look at, that I can measure. I'm a big fan of the scientific method. I don't think it's the be all end all, but I think it's a great way to at least eliminate falsehoods.
I think he's actually the perfect embodiment of both of us. How strange. All right, so I'm kind of in line with you, although I do consider myself a Christian. But in the same way that you found that there's a lot of things within the biblical text that are verified to be true, and this is even by people who are trying to denounce the Bible. And it more or less goes to the Abrahamic religions in a whole, that there is at least some sort of a truth that can be historically verified there, and the things that they're saying is going to come to pass prophetically, and things that are going to happen. So you have found your version of the truth, although maybe you don't get down with Jesus himself, haven't, whatever, open to your interpretation there. But for that same reason, that's why whenever I did go through what I call my period of doubt, I found my way back to Christianity, but it was on my own terms and in my own way. And that was because I was testing it against what I knew to be true. And this wasn't what I felt to be true. It was what I could verify, what experts in the field could verify. And beyond any shadow of a doubt, it's the only book that holds up to any actual scrutiny beyond level 2 or 3, which all other religions that I put to the same scrutiny could not hold to my level of scrutiny, is what I should say. So I was left with the thing of all right, either I'm going to ignore this truth that I have found, and I'm going to just put it on a shelf and willfully turn from it and try to find some other version of a truth for me, or I can accept that it is truth and 1 + 1 does in fact equal 2, and that's just the way it is. And for whatever reason, I have found myself in a life beholden to whatever the hell is in this thing, and I guess that's just what it is.
As far as the Bible goes, I think that for a long time I really did look at it like it was kind of something that has been manipulated over the years, things added to it, things taken away from it.
Absolutely.
You got into the Apocrypha. Could those books have been, should they have been in the Bible? Are they rightfully so out of the Bible? I mean, all these kinds of questions. Who's the one to really make those kind of decisions in the first place?
And I agree with all of that.
The Pope, exactly.
Right.
Somebody who we already don't trust. And
we know we're not getting the entire word. We know things have been taken out. We know things have been lost in translation. All of that, yes, absolutely, is still in play.
Right, but at the same time, I kind of, like yourself, I kind of enjoy looking in the Bible for a different kind of reason. Not only for research for other shows and stuff like that, but basically I like looking into it to try and see if there's a different perspective that we're supposed to be taking when we're reading this damn thing. Sorry, I didn't mean damn thing, but
dude, I cuss like a motherfucker, and I'm talking about the Bible. Like, come on, judge ye not, okay? You know damn good and well I ain't judging you.
I really love the Gnostic way of looking at things, the mystic way of looking at things. Whenever you were bringing up the Apocrypha, the Gospel of John, and we've kind of had that kind of talk here before. And are we supposed to be not looking at these words as literal? And we can question it 6 ways to Sunday, literally, but I think that there's more than one way to skin this cat whenever we're talking about the Bible and any of its references.
I would love to do an episode on the Gnostics, by the way, and like true Gnosticism and what the actual core beliefs of that religion are, because I halfway hear them get called a cult. I halfway hear them get called a religion unto themselves. I know that they were seen as heretics, and a lot of them were actually persecuted for a good while there.
Sure.
I would love to do an actual episode on them.
Well, the
I
theory
think Marty
goes,
Leeds has done a lot on that, because I think the name of his channel is Gnostic Academy. So he goes a lot. He also looks a lot into the esoteric texts as well, and he, the Freemasonry and different things. But he's got a different take on it all. So
there's another guy I watch, Esoterica is his YouTube channel. He's a Jewish gentleman, I believe Orthodox Jew, and he is deep with the knowledge on all things occult, all things little subreddits of a religion, and everything esoteric, historical references. I love his content.
Oh yeah, I love whenever people start getting deep like that, because it does cause you to look at a certain thing a different way. I'm not going to say that I would ever agree with the exact way that a Jewish person would look at the Bible compared to how I would look at it, because I think that's a whole different cup of tea of what we're talking about here.
Hey, Messianic Jews are on the rise, man. You never know.
I don't know. That's not my vibe. But that being, I'm not going to talk shit. But
I know.
But I just think that there is kind of a weird way to look at a lot of these things in a much different light. And I'm all about adventuring down those tunnels, dare I say, with the.
And you know that I'm not the type that believes that we take it word for word to be factual, start to finish. Like, no, there is absolutely parables. There's absolutely things that are supposed to be metaphorical. The entire book of Revelation is in a dream.
Right.
There's no way that's going to be legit. Or
the murky
who knows,
waters.
That bitch might be legit. There may be a 10-headed beast actually come up from the ocean one day. Like, I don't know, y'all, but
but the murky waters are where, it's up to the person who's interpreting what's real and what's fictional and what's a story, and that's why there's 1,000 different religions to Christianity.
I know. That's why I just kind of apply, the methods
just to
that
the Bible
it's
in
teaching
general.
anyway. Try to do my best to be the best version of that I could be, and hope for the best. Try to do more good than shit things on this earth,
So, Mike, looking into the Bible, have you found any breadcrumbs or anything kind of leading into this petrification study?
From the Bible, there's a lot of different lines in the Bible. Like one of them is that the stones shall cry out, and that it's actually talking about different beings that God has basically locked in stone, and for later judgment or to be freed later. There is the talk about trees, not so much in the Bible, but more in Jasher and Enoch. Some say that's metaphorical, and others believe it's literal. You've got passages in Ezekiel, I can't remember which Ezekiel, but it talks about this great tree, the Assyrian of Lebanon. Yes. And it's this tree whose branches spread across the land, and some say that was actually a metaphor for, I can't remember which leader it was in reference to, but that was actually referring to the influence that he had and the spread of his family and that sort of thing.
That's also the reference to the Freemasons, the Order of the Tall Cedars of Lebanon. We just talked about that in that episode. That is the reference to that dream he's talking about in Ezekiel.
Yeah, and that it's an interesting text, and maybe it's metaphorical, and maybe it's not meant to represent some world tree that stretched up into the heavens, or maybe it was, and maybe it was changed. I think it's interesting, there are things like Sodom and Gomorrah in that location where that supposedly took place. You have what looks like, these rolling hills that it just looks like rubble of what could have been a city at one point. And embedded into all of this rubble is the highest concentration of brimstone that's been found in the world. So the purest brimstone ever found anywhere is found where Sodom and Gomorrah was supposedly happened.
Get out of here.
There's videos of a guy that goes and he picks these little rocks out of the mud and puts them in a pile and lights them, and they burn hot. So brimstone is another one that could potentially lead to petrification. I have theories. I have a theory I call it boiled egg theory, and it's the idea that organs can actually be preserved, but we're not taught to recognize that because they just turn out as rocks. And so there are different anatomical features that are identifiable if you have the eyes to see them, which some would just say is paridolia, where you see a pattern that actually doesn't exist. You're just recognizing something that your brain is tricking you into thinking it's real, but it's not really real. But I found a whole bunch of stones that I believe to be petrified hearts. I've made 20 or 30 different videos. I've found hundreds and hundreds of examples. I compare it to the anatomy books. I show all these things. And my theory about how that can come about, I call it boiled egg theory, because you take an egg, it's liquid inside, you boil it for 6, 8, 10 minutes, and you get varying degrees of hardness. And you cook it too much, you don't want to eat it because it gets very tough. Well, that's surrounded in a shell and it's liquid, but the heat causes those proteins to denature and harden. And so I thought, well, is it possible that something similar could happen with the organs? Because I was finding these stones, but I couldn't explain why they were found outside of the body. Like with mud fossil theory, I could understand like a whole being, getting trapped in mud and then eventually petrifying, but then you would find the whole body. You wouldn't find organs separate from the body. So the empirical finds that I was finding didn't make any sense in that context. So I was forced to just accept what I was finding at face value and look at it more and try and better determine, what this pattern was that I was recognizing. But ultimately, I couldn't figure out why they were there without bodies and separate from the bodies. And so if you put the egg in water, it hardens. And if you think about the organs of our body, you've got hearts and kidneys and spleens and intestines and all these different things. Well, each one of those organs is surrounded in a big fatty sac. So that's like the shell of the egg. Okay. And then the chest and abdominal cavities are also really thick, fatty sacs that have all kinds of liquid in them. So you got your intestines and your organs are all in there in the chest and abdominal cavities, and they're floating in water and they're attached so they don't move around. But each one of them is encased in its own fatty sac.
Sure.
And so I started to ponder the idea. This gets back to brimstone. This is why I brought this up, is that if you had either some kind of volcanic activity, volcanoes can eject stuff at 1500 degrees Celsius at the speed of sound. Yeah. Right. That's a powerful force. And what would that do to a human body that stood in its path? Well, the outer portion of the body is just going to be completely annihilated and burned up because of the forces involved. But while that external portion is being destroyed, what would happen to that chest and abdominal cavity? It would be cooking as the outer portion is being destroyed, like a pressure cooker. And that pressure, if you've ever put anything into a crock pot, you can cook things way quicker in a crock pot than you can on the stove. You can take bone and you can turn bone to gelatin. You can turn it to mush in a matter of hours in a crock pot. So there are different ways in which the bones can break down, but the organs can harden.
Now I'll take that even a step further. Let's say that there was a burial site nearby, okay, and a body was buried only a foot down, and that volcanic blast just happened. That body would be completely preserved from being burned, right? However, all the oxygen would be completely stripped from the soil. Whatever liquid was in there would be absolutely evaporated, but the internals of everything would be left in place. And that would be a very good candidate, I would argue, for a potential find of a burial site later that somehow is fossilized and we can't exactly explain according to official narratives. I'm just throwing out another hypothetical.
You just described the process by which biochar is made. I don't know if you've heard of biochar.
I have not.
There's a guy named Topher Gardner who goes deep into that. And basically what it is he's developed different kinds of stoves that you can cook. You can burn wood, but you burn it while extracting all the oxygen. And the moisture and the oxygen goes out. And so what happens, instead of cooking down and becoming ash or charcoal, it becomes what's known as biochar, which has all of the original material in it. It's a slightly smaller volume than it was before, but it's incredibly rich with all of the minerals and the metals that would be in the soil. In this form. So it's a wonderful tool for agriculture and for growing things, this biochar stuff. But that's how it's created. It's created exactly through that process you were just describing of extracting the air and the water with incredible heat. And then you're basically, coal, most people don't realize this. Coal comes from tree. Yeah. As probably does crude oil. Right. The whole fossil fuel thing is a myth. Yep. Now they're talking about abiotic genesis of crude oil. Well, but you can go away from an empty field and come back in 10 or 15 years and it's there again. So it's like it's something that the earth is generating. And to prove that point, to think it's melted dinosaurs is kind of a joke.
Scotland has been heating their homes off of peat for years and years and years, and that is from dead organic material that they are literally taking a chunk of mud, bringing it home, letting it dry, and lighting it on fire. So organic matter being used to create fuel sources, we know that to be true, no doubt about it. Now, say that the oil is from dead dinosaurs, that was the narrative for so long, but then we keep coming back and these wells are refilling themselves against all logic. I'm sorry.
That happened in my hometown in California. There was an oil field not far from where I grew up. And I used to drive by it all the time, and those things were going up and down and up and down. And one day they all stopped, and then it stopped for 10, 15, 20 years. And then I went back, and all of a sudden they're all going again. Like, did they milk it dry, or where did that come from?
Well, more dinosaurs died, I think, is really what happened. More dinosaurs died in those 15, 20 years. They fossilized because, because
they figured out time travel and they went back and herded more T-Rexes to that area when the big impact hit. Yeah. So there'd be a bigger well.
100%.
For sure. 100%. South Park said it.
Time traveling dinosaurs that are herded into places so you can get more oil. I like that. It's a good theory.
Actually, I think Rick and Morty did an episode kind of similar to that now that I think about it.
The dinosaurs were like coming back to save humanity, but it turns out the dinosaurs were really the ones that were calling upon the asteroids in the first place.
Yeah, dude.
It was special. But
anyway.
Well, I want to mention peat again because that's another interesting thing. So you're talking about they're cooking peat, for heat.
Right.
Peat for heat. But most people don't realize this, but peat bogs, have you heard of those?
Yeah, that's where they extract the peat
bogs. So right. So it's this highly acidic environment that I can't remember what else is in it, but basically you can get these things called peat bodies, bog bodies, BOG, bog bodies. And if you do an image search for that, it's pretty gruesome. But basically,
people get lost out there a lot.
People fall in these peat bogs and they die. And then what happens is their bodies are preserved, but they're preserved in a very unusual way. The acidic content of the peat causes the bones to demineralize and the bones turn to mush.
Right.
Meanwhile, the organs harden. So basically what you end up with is a skin bag with a bunch of organs. So I didn't know about this until about 4 or 5 months ago. I've had the channel for about 5 years reporting on all these different things that I've been looking at and found.
So it's interesting.
But this was new for me because I had the whole boiled egg theory, but I couldn't figure out why the bones wouldn't be there. And then a friend of mine told me he's like, hey, have you ever made bone broth? And I never have because I'm a vegetarian. He's like, yeah, you put bones in a crock pot and within 6 hours, you've got mush. It turns to sponge first and then eventually becomes full-blown gelatin.
Well, that's where Jello came
So-
from. That's why horse bones used to be used to make industrial gelatin for
Right.
like Jello products.
And pig as well. And
Yeah.
So the
So yeah,
you
these
know, I
peat
call it
bodies.
boiled egg theory and then
Yeah.
bone broth theory, which is that the bones would potentially disappear. So I didn't know about this, but that's exactly what they're describing with bog bodies. Basically, the skin outer layer would then eventually be absorbed and you know, break down through, you know, erosion and whatnot. And meanwhile, the organs harden.
Yeah.
So my thought is, well, if you have already hardened organs and then this sac breaks and then the organs come out of the sac, then you could have a mud flood situation where you've got this further exchange of minerals with the organ that, you know, eventually turns them, you know, fully to stone.
So I heard about these bog
they're
bodies
ideas that
a few years back because, you know, I'm how I like nerd out about certain shit.
It reminds me of Shrunken Heads, bro. Like that same kind of shit.
So once upon a time, I was really into Scotch. And so you cannot get into Scotch without looking at these really, really peaty flavorings of Scotch, which led me to what the fuck is peat. So I looked into peat bogs and I looked into the whole process of like burning it and how they do this in Scotland. And basically, mummy bog bodies, they found that basically Scotland has had their own version of mummification accidentally for a very long time. And like the mud bogs are known to be like a place you don't go unless you're like safe about it because people die off in that all the time. So,
dude, even the hair survives? That's crazy.
Well, even after somebody dies, your hair and nails still grow for a little while until the keratin runs out. Like that's a vitamin thing.
No, I'm just saying, you know, it's weird that after so long, this dude's mustache is still there.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's wild as hell, man.
Check out. I mentioned it before. Mother Shipton's cave.
Mother Shipton.
Image. Yeah. Shipton.
Okay. But yeah, absolutely
Mother,
right. This is to your point about the boiled egg
Mother
theory.
Shipton's cave below.
These people were basically self-mummified, devoid of all oxygen, and even though there was decomposing material around them, for whatever reason, this environment made it to where they could be perfectly preserved in a very strange way. I would say that that's very akin to Egyptian mummification.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Look at this.
Yeah, and mummification that's a fascinating topic, but as I understand it, it's not petrification. Things aren't turning to stone. These things would turn to stone over time.
Oh, wow.
And it's interesting. Mother Shipton was a real fascinating figure as well, because she was a what do you call a female prophetess, or, you know, she was a seer that had all kinds of visions about eschatology, apocalypse, the end of times. And there's a poem that I've heard jade dreamers recite it several times. You know, that just talks about all the crazy stuff that's going to happen at the end of days. So she was one of the people that was putting out those ideas. And then take a look at there's another guy named just an image search, not on Wiki. Girolamo Segato. So this guy lived in the 1800s in Italy, and he and another guy named Paolo Guarini both had the secret to petrifying flesh. And there are actual museums that are still showing their works. And he could petrify anything. He could turn it to stone. So brains, organs, breasts, you know, you name it, they could turn it to stone. And that still exists. So his secret of how he did that died with him.
Oh, they did it to titties.
Oh my God.
Sweet.
They petrified strictly
boobs.
Okay.
I don't know if that's
Wouldn't you? I mean, come on.
Hell yeah, I would.
Immortalize them.
Preserve those fun bags, baby.
I mean, maybe more than just a 1 foot by 1.5 foot section of the torso. I don't know.
That's more valuable than a crustified heart. You know what I mean?
God, that's fucking a gruesome thing to just be like, all right, this is what we're gonna petrify.
Give me them titties.
Hack off every section other than this. Does it need to be symmetrical? Nah, not really.
I mean, those are pretty damn symmetrical.
No, look at the angle
I
of
wouldn't
the
want to
cuts,
have to do the prep work. I'll tell you that.
I would have been there for the prep work. Holy shit, no. Oh my God. That is quite macabre, bro. This is hilarious.
Well, if you do, let's see, just search for plasma. because this isn't, there's so many, this is what I didn't know about until I started to get into this work. You have these different narratives on how petrification takes place. And then when you start to dig into it, oh no, not just plasma. Yeah, I don't even know what to search for, but anyway, I'll just tell you verbally, but there's a YouTube channel who I've featured a few times on my channel in videos, where this guy is basically taking two different kinds of powder, like different chemical, he's got the chemical names on the bags, and he mixes them together and he puts them in a crucible. And a crucible is basically something that like you bake something and then the crucible can break. And basically what he used was like a votive candle holder that's like a thick glass so that it wouldn't burst. And he mixes these powders together and he puts a ceramic lid on top of the votive. He puts it in a microwave, and in 10 seconds, using plasma, he's able to convert these two powders into ruby.
What?
So in 10 seconds, he's creating rubies in a microwave.
Isn't that
And they're
similar to
raw.
how they do
They're not
cubic
natural
zirconia?
rubies. If you were to look under a microscope, you would see that maybe they were artificially created. So it's not like you can just sit there all day long making rubies and make a fortune.
I don't know. There may be a market for it.
Maybe it works.
My
Maybe
wife
he's doing
wouldn't know
it.
the
I don't
difference.
know.
You know what I mean?
There's a lot of people that don't know the difference between cubic
Save some money on
zirconia.
engagement rings. Yeah, that's
Right.
for sure. But
Hell yeah.
yeah, so that's really fascinating because he's doing it there live and you can see it happening. And basically he's creating the second hardest stone known to man.
Tell me that's not alchemy in real time.
In a matter of seconds using a microwave, which has a magnetron. I mean, all microwaves have a magnetron in them. They're powerful, but they're small. But on the scale that he's talking about, he's creating these pretty decent sized rubies from powders. And so it's just one of many things that I came across along the way. It's like, yeah, there's a lot to suggest that electricity can petrify, heat can petrify, high mineral content water can petrify, mud can petrify, ash, especially ash mixed with seawater, which is, if you have major volcanic activity, you're also going to have tsunamis. So wherever you're going to have all the ash falling, it's going to be mixing with salt water. And all of that stuff can petrify things. And it can happen quickly in time spans that we never would have dreamed of, and we definitely weren't taught in school.
Absolutely, bro. That is insane.
It is so crazy because, whenever we're thinking of things that are, thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of years old, we usually look to, the caves or the rocks or the mountains or, certain geodes. And we're like, oh, wow, man, this thing has to be at least 1 million years old. But this guy throwing a fucking, some powder in a microwave, I mean, albeit, some sort of chemical concoction for 10 seconds and creating a ruby, that just shatters, the illusion that things really take that long to create.
Well,
and if that's the case, if it shatters the illusion of it taking that long to create certain, diamonds and rubies or emeralds or whatever the case may be, does that kind of make them a little bit less valuable?
It absolutely does.
Right.
But it's the same story in a different way. It doesn't take as long as we've been told to create crude oil. It doesn't take as long as we've been told to create pretty much anything. It's just about if you know how to do it correctly. Now, if this dude would have been mixing these couple of powders in a crucible in the Middle Ages and produced a ruby, that would have been called alchemy, right? And he would have been called a witch or a sorcerer even. And depending on which circle he rolled with, the king of the time may have brought him into his tightest of circles, or he may have been burned at the stake as a witch.
Literally Satan.
Could be literally Satan. Your boy is mixing some powders in a crucible, y'all. Calm down.
Says the guy who's using a vape over there.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Alchemy in action.
Absolutely. That's my point, right? So these crazy things from back in the day that were called absolutely Satan, like, we these days may just call that chemistry. You never know. But then to the point of chemistry and carbon dating.
It's a false dichotomy, this separation between spirit and matter. Like that never existed in the ancient texts, all the esoteric teachings, which they now call, superstition or pseudoscience. But in reality, that's where a lot of the greatest knowledge is in these old texts, because so much of what we've been fed now from the mainstream model is, I think, either intentionally lies or an example of paradigm blindness where people have fundamental beliefs at the beginning of their investigations, and then all of their findings have to fit that into their beliefs. And so then they end up with these warped views of reality that maybe work sometime, but they don't work all the time.
And carbon dating backs that because it's such a flawed system. And the only way, and my neighbor is a geologist, so we talk about rock stuff a good bit. As a matter of fact, a lot of shop talk for her, but because she doesn't get to talk with many people about it, she actually loves talking to me about that shit. Because it's literally talking about rocks, and to most people that's boring, but like the questions that I propose are always off the wall with shit. And so carbon dating in and of itself is such a flawed system unless, like we've talked about many times, unless you know the whereabouts of the sample from the time it's supposed to be to now. If you know for a fact it wasn't exposed to any kind of fire or any type of volcano or any type of out of nowhere a giant saltwater bath, 400 years ago, like there's so many things that are unknown. So it is a drastic guesstimation based off of what they can tell. And in and of itself, it is not a good standpoint to take. And a lot of people will use carbon dating to back, like you're saying, they will find certain narratives to fit their mold, and they'll find a laboratory that did a carbon sample on a thing that backs that claim, and that's good enough for them.
But doesn't this kind of blast to hell the idea of carbon dating in general?
Well, again, unless you know the whereabouts. Like, for instance, the Titanic at the bottom of the ocean.
You also have the whereabouts thing is sketchy too, because then they have samples, right, that they refer to. Well, then you have to assume that the conclusions about the samples are accurate in order to accept the conclusion of the current sample. But even in the mainstream model, they say that carbon dating is accurate to thousands of years, but not tens of thousands, and definitely not hundreds of thousands or millions. And the larger that number gets, the more inaccurate carbon dating is. And there's all kinds of examples of people coming in with stuff that's not even old, and they run it, and they come up with these dates that are ridiculously high on something that's not old at all. So I take all of that with a grain of salt. A lot of the people that have really picked holes in the arguments when it comes to not just carbon dating, but there's so many. If you look up dating techniques on Wikipedia, there's literally 100 different ones, and some of them they sound so incredibly high tech and far out and advanced that it couldn't possibly be wrong, right? These scientists know what they're doing, and we can trust them, and it's settled science. And it's like, when you dig into it, you find out that each one of those techniques has been debated and contested, and then eventually just accepted as doctrine.
Right.
And unfortunately, a lot of the people that are calling them out for their dirty tricks when it comes to that kind of thing happen to be creationists or Bible believers. So they don't have credibility, because obviously their arguments are for the purpose of supporting their belief structure
through that lens.
So they're not true scientists, because they're Bible believers. That's the.
But it doesn't
that's
denote
the assumption
from the fact that they are calling it out and proving that, hey, that's not exactly true. They're a science guy, and it's
I
it's
think
very
there's-
similar to the flat Earth community.
That's
A lot
what I
of
was getting ready
people
to say.
will
Yeah.
write out, "Oh, you're a flat earther." So boom, whatever you're about to say next must be based in bullshit. And it's like, bro, just listen to him. I guarantee he's about to blow your mind.
And I say it all the time that, flat earthers have done a couple of great things out there. Whether the shape of the earth is flat or not, doesn't matter. They've called out NASA for all their flaws and all their fakery and all their gimmickry. And for one thing for sure, that they have definitely proven, at least to me, that the ball earth absolutely cannot be the exact thing that we're living on, just based upon a lot of their scientific methods, or proving it by certain videos and angles and fisheye lenses and stuff like that. And so I think that while it may not be flat, they've done a damn good job at proving that it's probably not round.
They've called out the main narrative, and they've shown the fallacies. Whether or not it is flat or round, the flat earth community has done their homework, and I'm not going to bash the hustle. You know what I'm saying?
I would say, on average, if you took 100 people off the street and you gave them a 10-question quiz on the heliocentric model, just basic stuff. How fast is the Earth spinning at the equator?
None would know.
What is the tilt of the Earth on its axis? How fast does the Earth move through the solar system? What is like those kinds of questions? What is the circumference of the Earth? What is the diameter of the Earth? These are things that are all supposedly settled science, and if you asked 100 random people, they would probably get 2 out of 10 right at best.
I would say,
and if you asked 100 flat earthers, they would probably get 8 or 9 out of 10 right, I would guess, because they've dug into it. They used to be ball earthers, and they started to question, and they started to dig into things, and they found out that, wait a minute, things are maybe not necessarily as they appear. And when it comes to the empirical stuff that they've done, whether it's long distance laser tests, whether it's high power optics, looking with infrared, so you're cutting through the atmospheric occlusion, you don't have to worry as much about refraction, and you can see way farther because the infrared is picking up the heat that's being absorbed by the land.
Yeah.
So if you're going across a long body of water and there's land on the other side of that water, you're going to be able to see it. And there's a channel called J. Tolan Media, and this guy's like a high level military contractor, private. He's an what do you call that?
He's a PMC. He's an operator.
He's a specialist that gets different tasks, and he's done amazing footage where he's seen things that were way too far away. Like he's got footage from over Texas, looking down at Baja California, and you can see the Gulf of California, you can see Baja, and you can see the water behind Baja, and the horizon is way beyond that. And that's at a distance of like 700 miles. And with his viewing altitude and his distance, based on the ball model, as they tell us it should be, the size, 24,901 miles, circumference, 8,000 mile diameter, those numbers, if you know basic spherical geometry, if you're using trigonometry, or even the most basic of the equations, which is distance squared times 8 inches, at that distance and that altitude, the bottom of Baja California, the tip of it, should be 2 Mount Everests below the horizon.
Damn.
And you can see all of the mountain range. You can see the water in front. You can see the water behind. And then, like I said, the horizon is beyond that. So that's just one of many. Then you got things like the rail guns that the Navy has.
Yes.
These things are boats that are on water. So they're not high up. No. And they're hitting objects in seconds that are 100 miles away.
That are currently off the coast of Israel. I just want everybody to be aware of that. Those current weapon systems are currently floating in the Med, putting that out there.
Right. So at 100 miles, most ball Earth believers have no clue what the numbers are. But at 100 miles, you're talking about 6,700 feet of drop at 100 miles. Wow. So that's more than a mile. So that when they shoot this object, it's going to just have to naturally hug and follow around the curvature of the Earth in order to hit the object that they shouldn't even be able to see. So that, I mean, there's just, it goes on, and all the NASA fakery and all the obvious, lies and dirty tricks. And so I'm not asserting a shape, and they always want to go, well, what's your model? If it's not a ball, then where's your model? And it's like, you don't have to present a coherent functioning model to debunk a false model.
Right.
That's a fallacy in and of itself. You can be critical of one and show it's that it's false in different ways without actually having to come up with a substitute. In fact, they're the ones that are asserting a particular shape, a particular size. They're claiming that they're using that and gravity based on the size of the Earth, and they're doing all these incredible computations in order to land robots on Mars, and yet all they show us is CGI. So these are the kind of things that get you going.
Right. I mean,
that was how it began for me. The whole channel was digging into that stuff, and then realizing, well, if that's up for grabs, then what about this? And what about that? And and you find out that there's a whole lot of stuff that's up for grabs.
Absolutely.
Honestly, dude. And, just as far as going back is like, because, a lot of people will say that if you're calling one thing out and saying that it's not that, then they automatically want you to present what you do think it is. And I think it's always a good idea to keep an open mind for these things, because there's no way for us to actually know. Like, unless we're going up in a NASA space shuttle, which we know that they're hardly even going up high enough to be able to get up to where, we believe that you'd be able to see some kind of curvature or some kind of flatitude, if that's a word. But, it's strange because it's almost
not,
like
it is now.
Imagine you have somebody breaks into your house and you think you know who it was, right? So you find out that person actually, the person who you thought it was actually has an alibi. He was actually at the movie theater while your house was being broken into.
Okay.
Well, just because you were able to debunk that one person didn't break into your house doesn't automatically guarantee that you know exactly who the real person actually was, right? So you're able to debunk something and not have an answer about who it was or what it is.
Sure.
So there's a way of doing that, and I don't think that a lot of people really understand that. As far as the flat Earth versus round Earth. Well, if it's not round, then what is it? It's like, well, I don't know. I just know it's not that.
That's fair.
But as far as this is something, Jacob, that I've been wanting to bring up for a while. I've actually had it saved in my phone for a specific moment like this.
Oh God.
And this is a cult member actually reached out. Shout out to big homie Travis.
Okay.
But he says, can someone please correct Jacob about Atlas? The Titan is not holding up a globe. He was condemned to hold up the sky/heaven. I only know this because I wrote a paper on this. Jacob uses this argument all the time for Greek cosmology, and he's wrong. Atlas holding up the globe is a newer concept.
So the statues that were carved back then are forming a newer concept. Okay. Once again,
Well,
I am not
that
like
sounds
a Greek historian.
You're describing the Egyptians called it the goddess Nut, N-U-T.
Okay.
Which, if you search for that, you find basically she's a goddess that stretches over and she's holding up the stars. So that's like your firmament, basically. And
Look up the goddess
Egyptian N-U-T, Nut. I work as a chiropractor, and so I'm
really
well familiar with the Atlas, and I'm constantly adjusting it on people. And it's interesting that the Atlas bone, which is the first in the neck, it's the most movable joint in the human body. Between there, that like the third from the right.
Yeah.
No, scroll down. Oh yeah, you can see she's
she herself is the heavens. So
is the heavens. Yeah, the firmament. That's the goddess.
Oh, how about that? She's holding the Ankh, like my boy Thoth.
Well,
let's go. Oh, it's right here. Yeah. Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, so
but look up Atlas. Look up a sculpture of Atlas, please. Again, this isn't like Jacob's interpretation of the dude is holding up a sphere. So if that's supposed to be the sky, fine. But there is not a single example of him holding up anything other than a spheroid.
That's not necessarily the Earth. It doesn't show like
sometimes it's the celestial sphere, which
right.
If you get into the
is the Earth not within the celestial sphere according to their model?
Well, it depends on the model. Like if you go to Cyrus Teed's cellular cosmogony, then you're inside of a big globe. And when you look up into the skies, what you're actually seeing is a celestial sphere, and that the rotation that we perceive at night in the sky is actually an object that's in the center of this globe. So it's a globe within a globe, basically.
Right. Essentially, to say that the firmament or the layer of the heavens that stretches around,
right?
Whether it be a flat Earth or a tetrahedron Earth or whatever.
Well, again,
It's the blanket that lays over wherever is
If
up
I've been
there.
mistaken this whole time, then my apologies. I thought that at least the Earth was supposed to be inside of that thing that Atlas is holding up, if not the Earth itself. If I have been misspeaking this whole time, my apologies, good cult members. Again, I'm not an expert in ancient Greek philosophy and theology.
Oh, here we go.
I know a few things about a few things.
Atlas is the god of strength and endurance. In Greek mythology, he is known as the Titan who carries the heavens upon his shoulders.
I thought that,
Heavens.
but Mount Olympus is where the gods lived, that being on Earth. I thought all of that was kind of in the same thing. Could be wrong. Could be wrong, y'all. My apologies if I have been misspeaking.
You know, I just wanted to bring it up. I mean, I always like to share that kind of stuff, and if I can get a good burn on you, then I will. But
I'm going to do some digging. Maybe it's very possible that I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, you know?
it's always possible.
very possible,
for
dude.
us in general. But yeah, dude. So all right. So speaking of Titans here. I mean, I know that you really get into Titans and possible mountains here. Like, can you explain a little bit as far as your beliefs on Titans?
Yeah. Well, I always thought it was just myth. I was a big fan of myth in general. I used to read a lot of people like Joseph Campbell. I was interested in comparative mythology, and I understood that these tales were how we pass on knowledge, and especially when we were pre-writing, and they were incredibly important because they taught us about the movements of the heavens and the seasons and when to plant things and all of these different things that are very important. And
Sure.
But I never really considered that there might be any truth to the stories, that they weren't just metaphor, but they were actual literal tellings of things that happened. So basically the line of thinking for me was, first I started looking into earth shape as a result of my friend introducing me to what I thought was the most crackpot idea you could possibly believe. And so I figured it would take me a very short amount of time to debunk him. I figured 10 minutes at the most, maybe 5. Find some pictures of Earth, a live stream from the ISS, boom, done deal, and then I start to find out, oh, they're using fisheye lenses. Oh, that's CGI. Oh, there's layering glitches. Oh, there's Photoshop, and it's easily provable because you can mess with the levels and you can see that the moon isn't actually, or the Earth isn't actually there. There's a box around it because they, early versions of Photoshop. And some people will say, oh, well, they didn't have Photoshop back when they did the moon landings. Yeah, well, they didn't have a digital Photoshop, but they still had the Photoshop where they could manipulate images in a whole variety of different ways. You can go back 100 years and see amazing things that they were doing at the dawn of photography, where they're creating all kinds of photographs that look like there's a ghost in the room and all these things that it's not like a digital manipulation. It's a real manipulation, or it's a double exposure. So
keep in mind, when the moon landing was happening, having a color TV in your home was like hot shit. Okay, like, you want to talk about what kind of manipulation could actually go unnoticed? Y'all, we're talking 69 when the moon landing allegedly happened. Come on now.
And to your point about the ISS, there's no pictures or video evidence of them actually sending it up to space.
Well, I mean, evidence as according
or
to who?
Constructing it, you think they'd be like, oh wow, we finally got this piece attached to that piece, and what a milestone in the creation. No actual construction footage whatsoever.
The Russians have a lot of this.
There's so many things they could have done years ago to make the flat earthers go away once and for all. Simple stuff.
Well,
you just can't find it. Like
the Russians had
for
the
example,
stuff with the sending the monkey into space, right? They had the footage, they had the rockets, you could see the construction of. The Russians were beating us in the space race, and out of nowhere, Hail Mary attempt, America's on the fucking moon, y'all. Don't even worry about how we got there. We just got there. It was like, bro, what?
Yeah, well, that's one of the narratives. I'm of the mind that all of the spacefaring nations are all in on the space lie.
100% agree.
Together. So that if that's possible, then all of a sudden you realize that the geopolitical atmosphere of these different countries that are supposedly rivals and are at odds with one another is also an illusion, because there's no way that you could have all of these 7 or 8 spacefaring countries. Who have you got? You've got China, Japan, India,
Russia,
has Pakistan
US.
sent up anything? Russia, the US.
I don't know. Was it Pakistan or was it Iran that was trying, or was it the Saudis? I remember there was one of.
But it's all just ridiculously easily debunked faked stuff when you start to look at it.
Yep.
I tried to show my kids some early Star Treks, which looked better than the moon landing stuff.
Yeah.
And they laughed me out of the room because they thought it was so ridiculous. I'm like, oh, we're gonna watch the original Star Trek together, and then we're gonna move on to the next generation. It's like, no, we're not. I got laughed out of the room, episode 1. So.
Oh man.
But they're a little more sophisticated when it comes to spotting tech BS, the kids nowadays. But
that's across the board.
So
if you look at horror movies that our parents thought were the scariest shit ever, meanwhile we laugh at them like there's some sort of comedy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a thing. That's an absolute thing.
Yeah. So anyway, I started looking into Earth shape, and I had to swallow my pride and realize that a lot of stuff that I thought I knew for certain to be fact maybe wasn't. And the more I dug into that, the more I started looking into timelines, questioning heliocentrism, looking at, like we've already talked about with all the religious texts. And then I came across these ideas of mud fossils. And one of the things that Roger Spur was on about in basically every third video was this giant dragon that is in the Sahara Desert. And this ties into, I think, the writings of one of the Greek philosophers, maybe Plato, where they talk about this great battle that took place between the behemoth and the Leviathan. And one is this fish and the other is this dragon-like creature that were battling it out. And Plato describes the location of their battle as being, I think, south of the Atlas Mountains, or south of at least the Strait of Gibraltar, which is
wow. So south of the Strait of Gibraltar, you mean in Africa? So yeah.
If you click on the one that it looks like a screenshot down and to the right there, so that's basically showing the fish. Your cursor right there is that's the fish down below the cursor. That whole area, you can, if you zoom in, maybe not on the screenshot, but if you're on Google Earth, you can see what looks like scales. And then that's being attacked by this dragon that's spewing some kind of stuff on the upper fin of the fish.
Whoa.
This is not my beliefs. These are all according to, and that's your 1,000 mile long dragon there. So when you zoom in on the gullet of that thing and you look at it, it's like you start to wonder, like, how, I mean, there you're not going to see it. You'd have to actually be in Google Earth for real to appreciate the detail. But you can go watch videos on, and the thing that was fascinating to me was the combination of, there seemed to be a lot of anatomical detail. Roger, he talks a good talk, and he's very convinced of all the things that he believes. And then he had these texts by Plato or whoever it was kind of backing it up. And then you've got all of these other myths that talk about the world, the great trees and these great beasts. And I grew up loving the Clash of the Titans movie when I was a kid. And so it was a what if sort of a question. And the thing is, this town that I live in Spain, there's a mountain here that is, the name of the mountain is Montgo, Montgo. And from multiple angles, it looks a lot like an elephant. And a lot of the locals call it the elephant because it's got a cave in just the right place. Here, I can show you a video real quick. Can I share the screen?
Yeah, I just allowed you to share it if you want to show us an example.
So let me
I love this shit, dude.
Channel videos.
This is insane. And I agree with you 1,000%. You cannot find a culture, period, around the world that does not have an ancient story of dragons, an ancient story of giants, and an ancient story of some sort of connective force to the trees or giant trees or some variation thereof. They across the board.
I can show you a little bit about how I got on this subject in the first place. Let me just show you. Let's see, screen. Yeah. So you can see these are, this is an interesting thing when you look at all of these different, you can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
You see these Earth models. Do you see my cursor as well when I move it?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So this is the Hindu version of the world, and we live on this pancake according to them. And there are all these other levels of heaven. different dimensions and whatnot. But it's interesting when you see that they all kind of had a very similar conception of our world. And then you've got NASA there with the ball, and Elon Musk sending cars up into space. But
you can tell it's real because it looks so fake.
Right. And these are, I'm always curious about the unquestionables, the things that you're not allowed to question at all. You can't look into the Holocaust. That narrative is, you're not allowed to question any aspect of it. Heliocentrism is another one. Earth shape, gravity, all of these things are basically set in stone. Yeah. And I think it's fascinating. I grew up at a time where it was considered a valuable intellectual exercise, and people used to be able to have different religions. You could even have different religions in the same family, and people still got along well and enjoyed each other, even though they didn't have the same beliefs. And somewhere along the line, we kind of lost that ability. This is a picture of Ibiza off the coast of where I live, 90 kilometers away. These peaks here, I don't know if you can see how clearly you can see that, but those should all be below the horizon at that distance. And I took that with my camera phone with no high power optics. That was a clear day from sea level. I took that photograph. So this is where it gets into all kinds of different things. You got your star forts, your mud flood, your Tartaria, your World's Fairs. There are all these different little rabbit holes you can go down. This one showed up about 7-8 years ago. This whole idea that maybe some of these mountains that appear to look like tree stumps might actually have been tree stumps. That was this video. It's worth seeing. This video, Geology Revived, really questioned a lot of the mainstream things when it came to our understandings about the cornerstones of geology and dating and what they tell us, and whether or not there's actual evidence supporting those things.
Okay.
This is the Mud Fossil University guy. This is talking about his dragon. Mentioned Clash of the Titans. And then it was really this video by J Dreamers that kind of synthesized a lot of these different ideas in a way that caused me to start looking at the mountain here in Javia with different eyes. And it was really these pictures that really hit home with me, because, well, you'll see here, this is Montgo.
That was like clearly an elephant, dude. That's crazy.
So you can see from the side, you've got this head shape, and then there's a cave right there, where an eye should be. And so I started looking at this and thinking, I'm gonna go off the deep end here if I keep exploring this, because I found that there was a head shape. There were the curves where the head meets the shoulders, the neck was there. There's this canyon that goes between where the legs would have been, and it looks like you can see the remains of a rib cage on both sides and a spine going across. So just from looking at it on Google Earth, there were like 10 different anatomical features that jumped out. So I was already aware of something called paridolia, where you see a pattern that doesn't really exist. And I didn't want to just kind of fall for that classic pitfall of just because something looks like something doesn't mean it necessarily is. Like, some will argue all day long that this is a foot, and it could be, but I don't think so. I think that a lot of these structures, which people out there are claiming are petrified titans or giants, you can see the profile here of a face, that what you're really seeing is paridolia in most cases. And a lot of times there's vegetation that are adding to the look, or even snow or whatnot. So
I always felt like paridolia was a cop-out word. You know what I'm saying? Like, people that are just like, it's like the scientist with no imagination that just can't imagine, and his history or his science being questioned or changed. I always looked at it like that.
Absolutely. It's a term that they use to hand wave dismiss what ideas that go against the mainstream narrative. So if you consider, it's not just paridolia. Paridolia is this visual thing of looking at a cloud and seeing a face or a dragon or something in the cloud. But you've also got what's known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is where people know a little bit about something and then they think they know a lot, and then they run with their beliefs.
Yep.
You've got the doctrine of signatures, which is another where things look like things. Like you got flowers that look like organs, and you got other flowers that grow and they look exactly like the monkey's face. It doesn't mean the flower is a monkey, obviously, but there are these reoccurring patterns that exist throughout nature. And so a lot of the stuff that people find and they point to and they say, oh, this very much looks like a person lying down on its side, and you've got these two caves vertically, which is an unusual configuration, and they're the right size and they're the right space for eyes. But what you don't find is boots on the ground footage where people are going up and they're exploring the eyes and they're getting inside of these sockets and they're looking for anatomical correlations. And that's what I started to do, because when I was looking at Montgo and thinking, wow, what if this really was an elephant? Then what does that mean? Well, it means that everything that we know about geology has to be revisited if there's any truth to that subject. So this is a slide that's just showing all of these different ways in which people go wrong with their research. So we talked about paridolia. You'll only see pictures from one angle, the shadows in the foliage, which I mentioned. Sometimes they're just flat out photoshopped and faked. And like with the advent of AI, especially in the last year, it's getting so sophisticated with the imagery that there's Instagram models that have hundreds of thousands of followers, and 90% of their followers have no clue that it's not even a real person. It's just some computer algorithm, and somebody's there curating the Instagram site, and they're literally making loads of money, and they're not even real.
Right.
So this is a real problem when it comes to truthing in general. You've got this whole paridolia thing where, like, that looks like a smiling little happy guy, but clearly this is just knots and wood,
All right, it looks like Timon from Lion King.
Right.
Yeah. So the critics will say, oh, this is just point and claim. There's no real evidence there. You've just fooled yourself. It's like a Rorschach test. People
Right.
can see anything in anything. So I decided I was going to approach it differently. I was going to go deep into the anatomical correlations. I was going to look, on-site investigation. I'd already been to the cave many times, and actually explored in here many times before I ever made a video on the subject.
Oh, wow.
And it was very unusual cave, which you'll see a bit of here in a second. These are just some visuals for things we were talking about before of the timelines they give us. They're talking about 500 million years, but nobody was there. Nobody can see that happening. They just claim they have all of these techniques, just like when they're talking about the Earth's mantle and the molten core of iron that's spinning, that's giving rise to you melt you melt a magnet down to the point where it turns to liquid, it loses its magnetic field.
Right.
So there's all kinds of problems with the mainstream model, and every single one of those problems they'll rectify with some seemingly plausible explanation. But when you start to take them all as a whole, and you realize how many of those far-fetched things you have to accept in order to believe their narrative, then it starts to be, prudent to look into other things. This is that petrogenesis cycle. So basically every bit of rock that exists, we're told, comes about in this fashion. And I'll show some examples of things in a little bit that, here, do these things make sense based on that mainstream narrative of wildlife dying, being compressed, and then forming these layers, which then are broken up and move through tectonic activity, which is what creates our mountains, we're told. And then there are all these different erosion processes that give rise to this kind of complexity.
Well, that type of erosion definitely leads credence to the fact that a mass flood, or massive times, even multiple floods, have happened to where this area that is allegedly dried most of the year, at one time was absolutely just wet as hell. Maybe even under the ocean itself. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that the Earth was different before, and that it's undergone major cataclysmic changes multiple times. Even the mainstream model, accepts those ideas.
Right.
But was Avatar a thing? Did trees that were miles wide at the base and stretched up into the heavens, did those exist? And I think there's very compelling and a lot of evidence in favor of that. But they want us to believe that this here, it's like the Earth did this for a while, then it did this, then it went back to doing that other thing. It's like this banding that goes back and forth in these micro layers. Does that really make sense why would it just go and do one thing and then do another thing? And then, and how do all these curves happen? This makes a lot more sense to me if you think of it in terms of tissue inside of a body or a tree. And if you look at how trees manifest, this is very, very plausible. This is
another alternative thought. What do you know of blacksmithing?
Not much. I mean, a little bit.
Have you ever heard of Damascus steel?
Mm-hmm.
Or a blade being Damascus?
Yeah,
it is
where
interwoven
they
layers
fold it over and pound it, and fold it over and pound it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it makes interwoven patterns of dark and light steel. And you can only get these pretty patterns based upon how you fold it and how you drill it and how you cut it. You can make different types of Damascus. These rocks.
Yeah, you get those patterns through marbling, and anytime something melts and then cools and melts again, and
exactly,
you'll get those kinds of things. So yeah, there's lots of ways in which that kind of thing can form. But when you're thinking of mountains, it's the Damascus metaphor might not work so well.
Maybe if we're talking about a volcano. Volcanoes themselves, when that goes off, the rock around it would melt, and I would think in certain areas you would have more. There are certain areas more inclined to have different types of rocks that would weld themselves together under that type of heat. Now, again, we are talking about very specific places that would even be possible to be discussed. But there are examples around the world of places like this. Again, I am not a geologist, just a hypothetical.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, there's lots of different scenarios, and the question is, do the mainstream narratives really match what you're seeing? And like when you start to see these concentric circles, this right here, this is a marble area in Patagonia. These caves are made of marble, right?
Is gorgeous.
This is sand. This is salt mountains. This is salt here. So you see all of these layerings and this banding, and it's going back and forth between these things. And yeah, you could say, okay, well, volcanoes erupted, and then you had all this ash, and that's why we have this black layer. And then, but it's the alternation that I have a hard time with, especially when you see the micro grain. To me, it makes a lot more sense that this is something that grew initially. These are salt mines. I mean, look at the detail talking about Damascus.
Yeah.
Oops.
Oh my God.
Yeah, sorry, it's
you're
scrolling
fine.
faster through those, but you can see that it's clearly there's all kinds of grain in here, and I think that it makes a lot more sense when you're looking at this stuff to think of it in the context of the great trees.
We have salt domes like that not too far from here too.
And then some people are on about the whole melted building thing, and they think that this is proof that the buildings were, that the brick melted. But I think it makes a lot more sense that these were formerly tree, and that this is Petra here, and you'll see a lot of different examples here. Like that's Petra. I mean, that to me, it's just so obviously wood. And to think that came about through some kind of sedimentary layering process, like how would that? I don't know how to pause it when I'm doing this, but
I'm loving it going through though, bro. The imagery is gorgeous. Everybody who's not watching this really does need to come check us out on Patreon and Rockfin.
Hell yeah. Yeah, this is
then you see crazy. This sort of thing. Right.
Yeah.
They're telling us that this is formed from cooling lava, that the volcano spewed this stuff up, and then because of flooding or whatever, there was a rapid cooling, and that led to these hexagonal columns that like Devil's Tower is made of, what you see here. But how does that explain this angle, right? It's just like, or how does that explain this kind of thing? These are obviously not the same, but how does this come about by random chance? This makes a lot more sense to me if it's part of a tissue or part of something that grew.
It looks like a turtle shell.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it does kind of.
Wow.
So these are just the kinds of things I've come across over the last years that to me don't make a whole lot of sense when you're looking at the mainstream explanations. But when you start to think about these as something that grew, I mean, the porphyry phonolite, which is what those columns are.
Yeah. There's
a lot of debate, even in the flat Earth and the alternative communities, that they're saying that there's no way that was once tree for different reasons. I don't even think that the best evidence for the trees are the plateaus or Devil's Tower. I think there's far more compelling evidence, which I'll show you some of in a minute. But I was looking at it from the perspective of the scientific method. I've got a bachelor's from the University of California, and then I went to school to be a chiropractor for 5 years, and I have a master's in chiropractic. And so I had to do a massive research study and write a 40-page research paper with loads and loads of footnotes. And it starts out by making observations, thinking of questions, and then you develop hypotheses based on what you've seen. And
super
that's
off
really
topic, but kind of curious now. What type of chiropractics do you major in mostly? What style?
I use a variety of different techniques. From the adjusting is primarily what's known as diversified, which is the most common of the approaches to adjusting. There's lots of different. There's upper cervical. There's something called sacral occipital technique, which is looking at the relationship between the upper neck and the head and the sacral area. There's literally like 200 different chiropractic.
What is the style that uses like a handheld pop gun tool?
That's called activator. I use activator a lot. I have an electric version of that as well.
So my cousin used to be a chiropractor. He just retired, but that was like his method. And in this area, he was the guy to go to for the adjustment, man. That little pop gun would hurt at first, but you would walk out of there like a whole new man. I'm telling you.
You know what's crazy is that, and maybe this is why, this is so gravitational to you, Mike, is that, you're looking into the possible tissues of these old beings, old titans, old trees, and that's really what you focus on in your real life is just tissue work, right?
I love it. He's looking at it from an analytical standpoint, but also looking at it with, as we would say, his third eye all the way open.
Fuck yeah, dude.
Yeah, so this was my approach here on the screen. You can see that I was looking initially at the aerial footage, photography. Then I started to notice that there were gross anatomical correlations that were, you have to look at mathematics and odds. Like it's one thing to roll the dice and roll double sixes. It's another thing to do that 3 or 4 or 5 times in a row.
Yeah.
That's the odds become astronomical the more times you roll. So if you're looking at anatomy and you're finding, oh, wow, it looks like an elephant and there's a cave in the exact right place. And then there are these like lines, they're called sutures. If you look at the skull, you can see them here.
Yes, I've seen this skull before.
Right? So this is an elephant skull here. And this is obviously human. And you can see these different colors are denoting the different bones. So this is the maxilla, the can't remember that one. This is the frontal bone, the temporal bone, and so these meeting points are known as sutures, and that's what you're seeing here. These meeting points are the connections between the bones. So I thought, well, if it is an elephant, which it could be something else. Some have said it looks more like a whale than an elephant. I believe it to be a vertebrate because the limestone, which comprises the whole mountain, is bone. If you look in the mainstream model, it's pretty wild. It's composed mostly of the mineral calcites of calcite, aragonite, and then they've changed the text recently. I have a screenshot of what it was before, but here we go. It takes place through both biological and non-biological processes, such as the accumulations of corals, shells, mollusk, what else? And spine, vertebra, exoskeleton, endoskeleton. All of that is made out of calcium carbonate. So what they're telling us is what you see here, this configuration is hundreds of millions of years of all of these creatures laying down and dying and being compressed into this solid piece, and then that's eroded by the rain and whatnot. That's your mainstream story when it comes to limestone. But essentially, if you read between the lines, what they're telling you is limestone is bone.
Holy shit.
Well, hold on. Is it saying that that's a way limestone is made or the way limestone is made? That's the only way.
Yeah, they're saying through non-biological processes. This is new, this text. I'm not sure what the non-biological processes would be, but then they get into all these different manifestations of lime. But I've gone deep into the whole limestone subject, and that I've done a series called, here, I'll just show my channel real quick. Anyway, so the videos here, if you sort by oldest, then you get this series that I made on the mountain. So the first video is just an overview, first video I ever made. And it's a pretty weak video. I would do it totally different now. It's almost 5 years ago I did that one. But the second video goes into the eye, where I went up and explored the eye in detail. Third video, the ear. And then the fourth is the tissues of Montgo. And that's where I really get into this subject of bone and what it's comprised of and what's inside the bone, like our bone marrow and our blood is produced there, our red blood cells. And that's a 6-part series. And if we go back to, where is it there? This is from the part where I'm looking at the eye, because one of the things that I noticed was that, let's see, you can see it here better, that there's this cave that goes through here. And you're actually looking through this cave now. And that cave is located there, and you can see it on Google Earth, and you can see it with photography. And elephants have a hole right there.
Okay.
Which is interesting. All vertebrates do. It's called the infraorbital foramen. So the orbit is the eye, infra is below. So the infraorbital foramen, each one of these little holes that you're seeing here, these are foramens. That's just the word for hole. And through there go nerves and blood vessels and whatnot. So basically, if you look at the mountain from the side.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but those foramens, as you call them, those tunnels through the skull, that's the same connections that make the ENT doctors, the ear, nose, and throat doctors. Those are those connections that go through those, correct?
Yeah, they're
throughout our
skull. All
skull.
that stuff. If they're eye, nose, throat doctors, they're going to be well versed in this kind of stuff. So
Sure.
Like through here, the optic fissure, that's where your optic nerve goes. And then there's these other fissures. And if you look here, there's this area that goes down. Now, obviously this is human.
Yep.
But in my videos, I've got actual 3D photography of looking at an elephant skeleton from lots of different angles. But the sinuses open up here. So interestingly enough, you've got the big cave, which is right there. This isn't a cave. This is the temporal fossa, which is where one of your chewing bones is. And that would be over here. And then the eye here. And then there's that cave that goes through that I showed a moment ago here. So that's a real big coincidence, right? That this elephant looks to be like this. Well, if you were to tilt this back, then this would be forward. And that's exactly where it is in relationship to the head. So it started to be just this long list of things that I was finding, many of which were very specific. And you can see here, I went in with 3D anatomical software to be able to really show people.
No,
there.
I absolutely
so
see the connection.
This is where it's going down at those angles. So I'm getting into the minutia here, but yeah, what were you going to say?
I'm just saying, I absolutely see the connections you're making here.
No, I love that you're actually, you're doing a lot more than just saying, look, this looks like an elephant. You're saying you're going back and looking at the ancient structures and, the basically the primordial skull of whatever is going on here and comparing it to this mountain. And I mean, I would say that this definitely suggests that, we don't know what the hell mountains are at the bare minimum.
Yeah, especially when you get into the tree stuff, which I'll do in a bit. But if you look here at an elephant skull, There's your optic fissure, right? And so this is the eye, this is that temporal muscle. So that whole cave that you're seeing in the other photos that I showed, that's all this section right here. Just that little bit. Okay. And then that's the optic fissure. And this is in that exact same location in the cave.
Oh my God.
Okay. So here, if you look at this skull, you can see that we talked about the sutures, which are these lines where the bones meet. This is the frontal bone of the elephant.
Yeah.
And then you have the maxilla. And there's a suture there where those bones meet, which I showed before here.
Yeah.
See this line here? And then that line extends into the eye socket because this is the frontal bone,
Right.
all the yellow. And then you have this orange bone, which is the maxilla. So there's a line there called a suture where those bones didn't grow together, but they meet. And so that's what it looks like in the elephant, right?
Right.
And then when you look at this, where is it? Oh, also, this line here is on the mountain as well. And
Yeah.
and then we have this. So here's that line.
Yeah.
And then in that exact place in the cave, you can see this overlap of stone that follows the exact same line.
Get out of here, dude.
Like, what are the odds? You know, and I show this in video. I'm not just like pulling up pictures and trying to make it look a certain way. I've actually, there's a video that I streamed live where I went up into the eye socket and I took questions and answers and showed all of this stuff live. Here, if you look at think of this as the eye socket, and you can see this portion juts upward, just like this does. Yeah. I believe this is the remains of the eyeball, and I believe that for a long time before I actually found confirmation of it. But I was up with some friends, and we climbed up behind this, and the whole back side of this structure is covered in a 10-inch thick layer of quartz crystal, the whole back side of that. So that ties into one of my theories, my biogeology theories, is that when things that are fatty start to petrify, they turn to quartz. So that would include fat, fascia, disc, eyeball, anything that's fatty in the body, I believe petrifies to quartz. And then also blood plasma. I in the fourth Unveiling a Titan video, I go into blood and bone, both, and show all of the different ways in which all the rocks on this mountain match up perfectly with what's known as histology, which is the study of tissue. And you know, the question is, how many coincidences does it take before you're maybe looking at a phenomenon rather than just some harebrained idea?
Interestingly enough, when they find a vein of a certain mineral through a mountain, it's always some vein that spans throughout in crazy configurations through the mountain. It's never like a pocket of, right? Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is crazy.
And we were talking, well, they use the anatomical terminology in mining. You know, they talk about a vein, a gold vein, a silver vein.
Right. Or an iron ore vein, or even a coal vein. And then we talk about the heart of the mountain. That'd be like the center heart that can fall if you dig in certain directions too deep. And that's what leads to mining accidents. Absolutely.
Interesting. And also with the, when it comes to mining for gold, for example, or silver, where are they mining that stuff? They're finding these structures that are quartz veins. Massive deposits of quartz, and they're following the quartz looking for the gold. Right? So that ties into the whole tree thing as well, because petrified sap is very likely quartz in my world anyway, and some people who hotly disagree with me on that subject, but I think I've got enough evidence to suggest that that there's truth to it.
Okay.
So would you suggest would you suggest that like kind of all crystals or any kind of, you know, these pretty rocks are essentially some kind of big animal's organs or skin or tissue or anything like that, like a sapphire or a ruby, anything like that?
I stay away from words like all. I think that's a big mistake. People get hung up on their pet theories, and then they want to run with that, and they start excluding all kinds of other stuff. This is what a lot of I think that, the melted building people, if you go down that rabbit hole, everything is a melted building to them. And I think that's just like, it's a form of, it's like a mental disorder when you try and apply your one idea to everything.
Yeah.
So I think more likely it's all of the above. You've got some mountains were once great trees. Even volcanoes, I think, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that volcanoes are basically smoldering trees, that the trees were creating different elements as they grew. And then when those trees got hit, if you imagine a transmutation of elements from one element to another, that things like gold and silver, I don't think that there were giant trees that had massive deposits of gold and silver in them. I think more likely the trees were growing and they were normal biological life forms, and then they got hit in a way that led to a transmutation of elements, and that's what gave rise to the gold and the silver and the copper. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that as well. When you go back to the things that were written in papers 100 years ago, where they're talking about different mining operations, there used to be petrified forests all over North America, and they harvested those petrified trees, many of which were still standing erect at the time, because they contained huge amounts of silver and gold. And you can find these articles where they're talking about $15,000 worth of silver to the ton from these petrified trees that they were harvesting. Well, that's 100 years ago. $15,000 today, that would be millions of dollars per ton of silver and gold. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff when you start to get into these things. What really made it go full-blown Twilight Zone for me was when I started to hypothesize that maybe there's an ear, because the eye was so well preserved and that side of the mountain is so well preserved. I thought, well, there is this kind of quarter moon shaped discoloration of the mountain, which could easily be seen on Google Earth and with the naked eye when you're outside. And so I started looking to see if there might be a cave up there. And as I was looking at the canyon name to try and figure out which trail to take up, because I was planning on trying to climb up and see if I could see anything that looked biological in origin,
right.
I found out that there was a cave up there that I knew nothing about, called Cova del Migdia. And that cave had been examined and explored by a team of geologists and archaeologists, because they found dead bodies up there. They found cave paintings, and it's truly a mind blow. So take a look at this. This is a little 90-minute teaser. Can you hear that?
Yep.
Was it too loud, or?
No, you're good.
Is that all right? All right. All right. So this is just a little teaser video that I made, summarizing the first 4 or 5 videos that I made in visually, just to introduce people to these ideas. And here's the entrance to the ear. And this is the actual team of geologists going up there to explore this thing. Not only did they explore it, but it was the most thoroughly explored cave in all of Europe at the time that they did this investigation.
Whoa.
They went in with 3D mapping. They went in with 3D photography. They did a full-blown excavation. You get to see the little highlights of it here. There's your 3D mapping.
Wow.
And here, I theorize, but I've never been inside, so I can't say. But if you notice, he's kind of going around a curve here.
Yeah.
And inside the inner ear is the cochlea, which is what allows us to hear our different pitches and tones, and whether it's high or low pitch. And it operates on different hair follicles that are pressed on by the liquid that is being stimulated and vibrated by the sound, right?
Yeah.
And those hair follicles, when you look at the histology of the cochlea, look a whole heck of a lot like that. So just another of many coincidences. That's a 3D fly-through if you've got the glasses.
Oh my God, dude.
And here's all kinds of creatures, and then tell me that doesn't look like a four-legged creature with horns.
Sure.
And then here they're all falling. There's another four-legged creature. To me, right there totally looks like deluge, right? Like some kind of a massive event wiping things out. But maybe it's paridolia. I don't know. And that's looking at the limestone above the mountain. So I'm almost at eye level here when I filmed that. So it's just one of these things where it's like the more I looked, the more I found. And like this, I told you the whole backside of this structure was covered in crystal. You can see that here, and you can see the crystal here.
Yeah.
This is about 10 inches thick. And if you look at the backside of an eyeball, it looks very fatty. And if that were to petrify, it's not hard to imagine that it would petrify to something like quartz, especially when you look up. Check this out. This is cool.
Whoa.
Dude, I love this.
Human serum albumin.
Your man is saying that basically the mountain is an elephant that died.
Massive motherfucker.
A behemoth.
Yeah.
If you will.
If you
petrified into what we now call that mountain. That is insane. And then finding all of these things, the cracks and the caves that line up like that. I mean, what do you call this?
That's an elephant, dude. That's what I call it. Easily. Like it.
Wow.
I mean, yeah. I mean,
Anyway,
I automatically, like, I want to believe, but I'm also not like, forcing my will to believe just because I want. Like, we're looking at the evidence here from Mike, and it's crazy, dude.
Yeah, I mean, some people are completely convinced and they say this is conclusive. And then when I get into the whole stuff related to the heart stones, which I've done a lot of videos on, people are incredibly convinced of that. But there are also people who tend to be more open-minded and maybe believe a lot of stuff they shouldn't believe, Mm-hmm. But ultimately, I think the most conclusive evidence out there when it comes to gigantism is for the trees themselves, which we can get into in a little bit. But I was going to show you real quick here under anatomy. No, histology. Got so many folders and files. Sometimes it's hard to find things. So if you look at, this is interesting here. This is what bone looks like. Yeah. So this central portion of the bone is known as trabecular bone. This is where our red blood cells are grown. The blood plasma is in here as well, the bone marrow. And the outside of that are these tree-like thick layers that have very little vascularity, which is the word for blood vessels, going through. So this is like Swiss cheese, whereas the sides here are compact and they're not going to have a lot of holes in them. And when you look at, this is skull bone, it's like a sandwich. You've got the compact, then you've got the spongeous, also known as trabecular. And this is what it grows like. It grows like rings of a tree. And when you see it under a microscope, it's fractal. So it continues that Swiss cheese as you zoom in and zoom in and zoom in. And when you start looking at the structure of bone and specifically trabecular bone, this is exactly what the limestone all over the mountain looks like. It's identical. And and the reason so this is what it would look like bloody, and this is what it looks like with the moisture taken out of it.
Oh, shit.
And so then you start looking at the rocks on the mountain, and you find there are all these channels that go through them that make no sense from an erosion perspective, because they go in and then they branch off into smaller channels going in different directions. How does water erosion create rivulets and fissures that then branch off in a fractal fashion that looks exactly like blood vessels? It doesn't.
So I'll say this much
sense.
Towards these rocks that have the veins going through them. So I have family that live out in West Texas, and when you go out there, there is vegetation, but the tallest tree is like arguably 5 feet. Okay, like in Louisiana, we look at that and see a bush. Out there, though, that is what they have as vegetation. Now, when they kill this plant and they pull up the root system, it's through rock. There's very little dirt for it to grow through. So these bushes and these trees and all the vegetation have to actually make their own root system through the rocks to get any kind of water from anything. So there is already some sort of precedence for this, but still to the level that you're talking about, it is pretty wild to look at. At least there was some sort of vegetation that grew there to that level.
It's possible that the giant trees that tree roots actually created these channels
for sure,
and then what was around them petrified, and then the tree root itself was softer and broke down.
Very possible.
That's a possibility. I lean away from that with Montgo specifically because here I'll show you. I've got probably. It's over 50 different anatomical correlations.
Oh, no, look, I'm saying this could have been the very basis, the very tippy tips of the root system for these giant trees. Absolutely.
There we go. Okay, so this is the coincidence list so far for Montgo. And you can go through these one by one. Like I said, before I went up to the eye after getting on this idea, I pulled out a whole bunch of anatomy books. And I looked online and I looked at 3D anatomy of elephants, and I've shown you all that. And so I started to document things that I would expect to find when I went up there if there was any truth to the theory. I didn't want to go up and look at stuff and then try and figure out how it fit in. I wanted to have a list of things before I got there that I would expect to find. And there were some very sutures, right, where the bones meet. The infraorbital foramen, I could already see that from Google Earth. And then you've got, the channel passing right through there. So that's what this list, but that's just page one because the number is over 50 now.
Wow.
And then you can see at the bottom here, Google Earth censorship. That was an interesting thing because I was doing a lot of this study on Google Earth, and after I made about 4 or 5 videos on the subject, Google Earth changed.
Of course it did.
Yeah.
Something that's supposedly set in stone, and Google Earth is changing. That's not even shocking.
Right. So this is the 5th video of the Unveiling of Titan series. I show the before footage because I used Google Earth as a drone, essentially, where I was flying in from far away, very slow, so that I could get some pretty high definition footage of the mountain. And so it was really effective for that. And then one day I was in an interview and I was trying to show this to a friend, and all of this stuff got blurred out. So you couldn't see the eye anymore. And the only way you can see the eye now is if you get in really close and then it opens up like you're seeing there on the left. So that was a coincidence. And then this was,
oh my God.
Now you see me, now you don't, man.
Here's the before, right? Perfectly clear, nothing blurry, can zoom in as I like. I can fly by it.
Yeah.
And then here's after. Can't see anything unless you get up real close.
Why the hell would they do that?
Yeah, because now you can't see the whole picture. You can still get in. It's a big tourist area, and a lot of people hike up there. So they needed to kind of keep it, the detail available. But now you can only see it when you're focused in on a portion of the mountain.
Why wouldn't you show the cave? If hikers go up there and it's a touristy area, bro, show me a hiker that doesn't like finding a cave. That's bullshit.
Yeah, and this, in my opinion, this is only whenever they start covering things up, whenever they start blurring things out. Maybe the internet used to show it, but now it's like something totally different. Obviously, that cave or that mountain or that structure hasn't changed, right? So why would they go to this length, this effort to just cover our eyes with all this?
But for why though, right?
It further proves the point that they probably have some ideas or some evidence that this could be some kind of petrified animal.
Look, we've said it before, when there's this many levels of fuckery going on, right? When this afoot.
Yeah.
We can't ignore it, y'all. We cannot.
Totally. Yeah. And so, this is why I had all these things in mind from the beginning, because after 12 years of college, the last thing I want to do is like go out there going, hey, the stupidest thing you could possibly imagine over there is true. Check this out. It's not exactly a good look.
It doesn't get received well. I feel you.
Right. So I decided to take it very seriously because at the very least, I thought, what a fun intellectual exercise. Like going back, I started to say it before when it comes to the earth shape thing. So many people are triggered by flat earth, and that's the stupidest thing. You find out it's not the stupidest thing. There's actual flat earthers that are debating PhDs in physics and making them look silly because they know more about the heliocentric model than the PhD does in some cases, and so it's not a simple subject at all. And why would the Google algorithms, like, there's nothing that's more banned than flat earth when it comes to the algorithms. So you do a search for flat earth on YouTube, and you're going to get hundreds and hundreds of videos that are supposedly debunking the subject, and they're strawmanning the shit out of the arguments, and they're misrepresenting
Epstein's list and Epstein's flight logs are more censored than that, but I'm with you. Flat Earth is right up there at the top. Well,
they're just delaying that information. Yeah. It's not exactly changed. You know what I'm saying?
It's banned.
But I want to throw this out there. Big shout out to our girl Tiffany Haney, who sent us, who's from Holistic Healings. It's crystal shop in Ohio, but she actually sent us this crystal of an elephant. Here, I'll show it right here. And what I asked her, I was like, well, what's the significance behind like a crystal elephant? And she says that it's basically for good luck. Right. So if you're and I'm sure there's many other properties. That's just the one I remember. But, if you're kind of trying to censor that this megalithic structure that possibly could have been an elephant could have like some luck or some like good energy around it. And then going on Google Earth and trying to make it look like it's not an elephant unless you're, somebody that actually lives there that knows the stories behind it. And I don't know. I kind of just want to bring that up, but
watch somebody say this whole episode, including that crystal, is just because we're Ponzi scheme members of the fucking Republican Party.
Oh yeah. Well, that's all conspiracy theorists nowadays, right?
All right.
We actually just had a guest on Meta last night, and he was like, he goes, I'm old enough to remember that the Liberal Party were the conspiracy theorists.
Yeah.
Like they were the ones that were talking about fluoride in the water and chemtrails in the air, and then there was something that happened in the early 90s where everything shifted.
Yeah, we had a big push, didn't we?
It's crazy.
The internet became a thing, I suppose.
I venture to say that it'll go back around to the liberal ideology of conspiracy eventually one day.
I hope not, because the liberal ideologies these days are kind of out the box, dude.
Well, old school liberalism, like back in the early 90s, that's like the smartest people ever in my mind, at least whenever it comes to politics. You look at the far right and far left. I'm not trying to get that into that right now, but it's.
Well, they used to be the champions of free speech and sovereignty, personal sovereignty, and all this stuff. And then, like in 3 decades, they became They went from my body, my choice to, get the jab or, jump off a cliff.
Right.
Yeah.